Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another Prog Report podcast. Another really cool episode here for you. We got some special guests, some guys that have been on the podcast before, and I think the first time for all three of you being on our new video series that we've been doing of late, which my intention was not to do them so much, and now we're doing them all the time. But anyway, I'd like to welcome Daniel Levy all the way from Brazil.
Hello, everyone.
How you doing, man?
Oh,
Kyle
good.
Graves all the way from Los Angeles.
What's up, guys?
And Kyle Fagala from Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah, I feel like I have the lamest background. Everyone else has cool stuff back there, so I just have wood paneling. Sorry.
Yeah, well, you have the cool mic stand frame.
Yeah, yours is more professional. So.
Yeah, it's what are you doing?
Everybody's very
happy to
pro.
Be here. Yeah.
So the reason why we gathered here is because as this podcast is coming out, it is the 10th anniversary of the day that Mike Portnoy left Dream Theater, which for everybody that follows, I think the Prog Report or progressive rock in general, was a pretty big day. Dream Theater, no doubt, was at the top of the mountain as far as progressive rock, progressive metal, one of the top bands of all time. Portnoy at the time still is one of the best drummers ever. And came as a shock, really. No one had seen this coming. So a lot has happened in the last 10 years, which we want to cover and just sort of give some takes on the influence that Mike has had in the last 10 years and the change in the prog landscape that this had. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the bands that have come from this, a lot of the projects, the tours, the events, may have not happened had he still stayed in Dream Theater. Now, who knows what else would have been and how many more albums they would have done and what they would have done. But we've been fortunate to have them continue on and make some great music, and Mike do an incredible number of records, which is, I think, unparalleled. I can't imagine anybody putting out as much music as he has in a 10-year span. So we just want to talk about that a little bit and give everybody a chance to just speak about what finding out about that was like, and talk about all the great stuff that's come out. So Kyle Graves, let's start with you. You have the closest relationship with Mike over the years, which anybody that heard our Dream Theater Top 5 from now a few years ago when we did that, which is crazy. Kyle was on that one and told some great stories. But I want to start with you first on maybe give a little quick background on you knowing Mike a little bit and finding out about that news that day.
Sure. Yeah. It was a shock. So, going back to my history, I got into Dream Theater on the first album, When Dreaming Day Unite, in 1989. 91 rolled around. I was looking for it on CD, couldn't find it anywhere, wrote the band a fan letter. And at the time, Mike was answering all the fan mail. So he wrote me back. And I ended up kind of forming a relationship with him that's turned into a friendship over 28 years now. And so when the split happened, a little precursor to that, in 2010, when they were on tour with Iron Maiden, they did a one-off show in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I happened to be in the area, so I went up there, met up with my cousin, we went to the show, and was talking to Mike after the show. And for the first time, it was the strangest conversation. We'd known each other at that point for 18 years. And I said, "Oh, so what's next after the Maiden tour?" And he says, "We'll see." And that was the first, the weirdest answer, because it was always, Dream Theater's going back, in the studio or working on Liquid Tension Experiment or whatever it was. And his little "we'll see," a couple weeks later, I had this very vivid dream of a newspaper headline that said Dream Theater on indefinite hiatus. And it was like scenes from a memory, newsprint or something. And literally 3 days later is when the announcement came out.
Wow.
So it was bizarre. It really was. So for me, I woke up to that news that morning, and Mike was always, for me, the heart and soul of Dream Theater. All the guys, Dream Theater, great, of course. But he just did so much for that band and for all of us as fans. So it was to me, I kind of likened it to 1970 when the Beatles broke up, how people must have taken that news. It was a big thing for me.
Yeah. Kyle Fagala, how about you?
So we'll go Kyle here. I don't have as cool of a story. To be honest, I mean, all I can do is share kind of what my reaction was like. At that moment in time, I had sort of drifted a little bit away from being a Dream Theater fan. I was not as big a fan of the final two albums with Mike. I got into them in '99, Scenes from Memory, all the way through to Octavarium. I was like a junior in college. I remember listening to that at a summer study abroad in Italy. And it was like, you had like 3 CDs and all those things. Like it's not like that anymore. Now you have access to all the music in the world, but when you had like a Walkman and you had like your 3 or 4 discs, like that's what you listened to, you know? Yeah. And so I had Spock's Beard, Octane, and I had Octavarium, and both 8s, you know? But I wore it out. Love that album. And then I just really didn't connect with the other two, kind of drift away. So I was actually really into Avenged. So when that album came out, like that spring, summer, I was like super excited that he was in that group. And I was actually hopeful that he would continue on in that group. So when he broke up with Dream Theater, of course, I was sad, but it felt, and I'm not just saying this in hindsight, this was at the time, I just felt like this is great. Like he'll go into Avenged, he'll do that. Like their next album is going to be incredible. So I think the sadder moment came when it didn't work out with Avenged. And then it was sort of like, oh man, you know, what's going to happen now? So in hindsight, obviously, and in some ways, obviously real sad that he was out of the band and everything. But I was at a point where I was sort of like Mike, like wanting something creatively different from him.
Daniel, how about you?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, I was like 15 years old, meaning I was in high school. Wasn't like, I'm still not very mature back then, even more. So it was, the news were shocking to me because I was a fan for only, I don't know, like 5 years. I was 10 when I started listening to Dream Theater and proggy stuff. And it was like my big band, like Dream Theater, Symphony X, like Neo, Transatlantic stuff. That was and still is my thing. So listening to the news, reading it was late at, I think maybe 10 p.m. I was at home, like, I don't know, maybe doing homework, who knows? And I read it on Facebook and I was like, okay, this makes no sense. I remember Mike tweeted something like RIP MP DT 1985 2010, like one of those cryptic tweets. And I was like, what does that mean? And then like 15 minutes later, like the press release came out. I read that, like a bunch of my friends called me, did you hear the news? Did you hear the news? Everyone was confused. Nobody really understood what happened because like, we got to remember that Mike wasn't just a drummer. This is pretty established, but he was the leader of the band. He was the guy that was writing everything. They were publishing. He was in many ways the soul of the band, like with the different set lists and all the little nuances and details that made Dream Theater what they were. So that was super shocking. Like if any other band member had left that day, it would be shocking, it would be weird, but not as much. So to me, that was pretty, I remember I was pretty crushed. And I was like, as opposed to Kyle Fagala, sorry, we have too many Kyles. But I was never really into Avenged Sevenfold. Like it was never really my thing. And they were really popular at the time. I had a bunch of friends that only listened to him and loved it. But to me, it never clicked. It never was really my thing. And he had like Transatlantic, which I loved. But in that moment, it was hard to see like, okay, what he's doing, he's going to Avenged. Now what? You know, so it was.
Yeah, for me,
like,
that was going to be a weird move.
Yeah.
Although I did like Nightmare. I wasn't a big Avenged Sevenfold fan also, but Nightmare I thought was actually good, probably because him being on it, frankly. But yeah, I remember, I think I was driving and then you sort of stopped at a red light, you check your phone, and then I saw the news or somebody texted me, I don't remember. Then it was just like, that can't be right, you know, and then you drive home and you start looking it up. It was pretty crazy. It was a big shock. I had experience feeling that way a little bit when Neal left Spock's Beard, because prior to that those 6 years, those 6 albums with Spock's and that music that Neal made there, that was like peak music for me at that time. I was a huge Dream Theater fan from before, but I was completely obsessed with Spock's Beard and Neal at that time for those years. And him leaving that band was just like a gut punch. And didn't know what was going to happen there.
And that's the feeling, like when something like this happens, you gotta wonder about the future. Like, okay, I think everyone's gonna be fine, but I have no idea.
Right.
And everything that I know about the band's dynamics and the members, it's pretty much gone. So we had no idea how like Dream Theater would go with like auditions and stuff and continuing with new albums. We had no idea who Mike was gonna work with. And we all know that ended up like being completely on the positive side. But back then we had no idea.
Well, I think there was a little bit of experience with him having done some other projects. So I felt like at the time, okay, he's probably going to do a lot more things because that seems to be what he's always kind of wanted to do. And let's just see where it goes. So it was a shock that he left Dream Theater and what was going to happen to them. I don't know that I was as concerned about what was going to happen to him musically, I think.
I think because he had done so many projects like that, you knew he was going to do other stuff.
Yeah.
But the Avenged thing was sort of the weird, like, why leave this band that he's known and loved and his family for so long to go to join another established band as opposed to doing another new project or a new band. So that was the weird thing for me. I just didn't know what was happening.
I think it's probably for the best that it didn't take.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
You know,
in hindsight.
Yeah. And, and then, okay, so moving quickly after that point, the first thing he did, which I want to talk about some of the bands that he started, joined, got involved with, whatever it is, over these 10 years. The first one from that, which I think was also something maybe none of us expected or thought he might do, was Adrenaline Mob. So
yeah, I really liked Adrenaline Mob. It was totally different. It was definitely not about the number of notes that you could play. Oh, well, except for the guitar player. But as far as it wasn't proggy. It wasn't about super long songs. It was about groove and fun and energy. And I really like that. And in the original incarnation of the band, there was a second guitar player named Rich Ward, who was from Stuck Mojo. He's now in Fozzy with Chris Jericho. And I actually used to deliver pizza with Rich Ward back in the early 90s. So the fact that he and Portnoy were in a band together, I was pretty fired up about it.
Great.
But yeah,
it was pizza.
It was Pizza Hut. Yeah.
Pizza Hut. Good.
Pizza Hut. So yeah, it was really cool that the two of them were in a band, and Rich is a great player and very riffy. So I thought it was a perfect marriage, but definitely a little left of center than I think what we thought he would do first out of Dream Theater.
Yeah.
My reaction to Adrenaline Mob, I was super excited because, like I just mentioned, Symphony X, and Russell Allen is one of my favorite vocalists ever. He's phenomenal, and I always want like those dream roster bands. Dream roster. I always had Russell and Mike together, so coming into it, I was pretty excited. I liked the album, the first one. I thought it was fun. It had a couple of fun songs. I remember they covered. Which was the Duran Duran song they did?
Come Undone.
Come Undone. Yeah. I love that version. I think it's great. It's like great. Every once in a while I'll listen to that and some of the other covers too. In the end, not a band that necessarily clicked with me, but I enjoyed some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, if we're going around the bend here, it's of the bands he's done now. Again, in hindsight, it's perhaps my least favorite. It just did not connect with me. It wasn't that it was metal or that it was what it just, I think on paper, the band made a lot of sense. It just didn't gel. And I think that's evidenced by him leaving the group. And I don't think it was like there's no animosity there. I think he probably really got along with the guys, and it just didn't produce probably what he'd had in mind. And sometimes things are like that. Like I think his leaving Dream Theater, probably if he could pin it down to one thing, it was just sort of a gut emotional feeling. Like who did he like to hang with better? And he was on interview saying many times he just loved hanging with those guys, and the vibe was good. And it's just like any old relationship. There's an expiration date on just about any relationship. And once it reaches that point, it's a strain, and it just, I think, taken its emotional toll. I think had he been able to take a break like he'd asked for, I think he could have gotten to a place where he was happy to, be back in the group. But so I think he was seeking out as much as anything in terms of whether it's prog or metal, whatever. I think he was looking for guys that he could have a good time with, probably.
Yeah, especially after Avenge, because that was that camaraderie that he was looking for. A bunch of young guys all going to the gym together, all, kind of hanging out. But yeah, a big thing.
Lifting the boys.
I read nothing about gym activity with that band. Okay.
Oh, that's you remember Portnoy got ripped, man. He got really muscular and thin. He said it was because he was hanging out with a bunch of 20 somethings.
That's funny.
But yeah, I think like if you leave a marriage, you know, bands always talk about a band being like a marriage. You're not going to leave your one and then immediately go get married again most of the time. You date a little bit. You kind of see what's out there.
Right.
So I think, you know, he was kind of finding his way.
Well, he did continue with Neal, which was great. So that, you know, I think they made the Testimony 2 record right after, and then Momentum. And then he went on tour, and that's when they got Eric Gillette involved and Bill Hubauer, and, you know, what would eventually become the Neal Morse Band, which was another big thing for him, big band that has turned out from all of this. I think the key one for me was that made me feel like, wow, this is really going to be something, was Flying Colors in 2012.
Yeah.
And I've probably said this on a number of podcasts many times, but at that time, maybe even now, I don't know, but at that time, if you would have told me pick your super group, it literally would have been the 4 guys in Flying Colors, easy. And so when I found out that's a band, that was the most insane thing to me. And I could not wait for that. I didn't know who Casey was at the time. I'd probably pick him as the singer, knowing how he is now. So that was pretty incredible, and I got to see. That's a show I had never done this before. Fly to another state to see a show, and I flew to New York to see that Flying Colors show. That's the first time I ever did that.
Yeah, we were there. I was there too. Because
that was just too momentous for me to miss. So that and I think that for me has been the standout band of the last 10 years.
We were talking about like the feeling of confusion and not knowing what's going to happen, and like being slightly worried for like the musical stuff. As soon as I listened to the first Flying Colors record, I remember thinking, yeah, I think it's fine. I think we're fine. Especially like if you wanted something more like proggy, you went to Infinite Fire, and that hits all the right notes. And you had all the other songs in the album, and each one is so unique, and makes the band what it is. Really, it's very different, trying different things, and it's always interesting. So, and the first album came out, everybody loved it. I remember the reaction was super positive, and the second one rolled around, and I think it was even higher. Probably it went a little bit like a little more on the proggy side, and I think a lot of people were happy, because like all the guys in the band are prog heroes, so it made sense.
Yeah, I really selfishly I wish that was a band that would be full time, that they could really commit. I think it's a band that could play bigger venues if they really, you know, pushed it and promoted the albums a lot more and made it more of a full time thing. There's obvious reasons that they can't, Deep Purple and all the different stuff that goes into it. But especially after the third album, which I think is just an incredible album. Probably my favorite at this point.
It's hard to decide. It's one of those bands you never know which one is your favorite.
So mine's the first. I still love it. And it seems like people seem to like 2 and 3 more, but they're all great. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing I keep saying hindsight, that's my quintessential this podcast, but is that album didn't come out until March of 2013. So there's a period there where, you know, in that moment you're thinking, I don't know if this is the right decision. You know, at that point Dream Theater had a couple albums, maybe the second one hadn't just yet come out, but I mean, you know, they'd had some definite work that had come out. So you know, so for me, for sure, Flying Colors is perhaps my favorite thing that's come out of this decade. And at that moment, it was really the turning point, I think, in terms of saying Mike made the right decision. And of course, there's a couple more things that come that really strengthen that argument. But that's really, for me, where it starts. Even though Testimony 2 came out, this is his first album post Dream Theater, and that album's incredible. Right. But I kind of missed it in the mix of all that. You know, like it wasn't so much on my radar. Momentum is really kind of what brought me back to listening to Neal again and going back to that and being like, this album's incredible. So
I mentioned Infinite Fire being like the song that turned me like and thinking everything's gonna be fine. But now that you mentioned Testimony 2, it was probably Seeds of Gold.
Yeah.
And then, well, of course, I mean, obviously we have to mention the Neal Morse Band, and probably, I mean, we're talking about Flying Colors being what we think is the standout band. And again, this is not diminishing the incredibleness of the Neal Morse Band or Sons of Apollo, which is also fantastic.
And Winery Dogs, which I gotta mention.
Sorry?
Winery Dogs.
Winery Dogs. We have to get to that.
Yeah.
I'm in the prog mind. Sorry. But we got to mention Similitude of a Dream. If we're talking about epic albums during this 10-year period, that might be the album that is the standout. And I think Mike has said as much. What are some of the albums that you guys think are the key ones from the last 10 years that he's been involved with?
I mean, Winery Dogs debut to me is a perfect album.
That was great. That was a really great record, and it holds up. It's fantastic.
Yep. You got an album where like the track that doesn't make the album is incredible too, Criminal, which was like on the Japanese one. But that concert, and so to me, a band is about the energy and the vibe. And that first tour, seeing them in a little club in Little Rock, first time Mike ever played Arkansas, probably will be the last time. Right up on the stage, just so loud. You know, Billy's so loud, and Richie's vibe on stage is incredible. That is a top 5 concert. Just watching them just blast through those songs, doing the Talus song, like, I mean, what a concert. And that album still stands up to me. And I love that style. Not prog, but it's got elements.
Yeah, just great, good hard rock. You know, just great soul. There's a kind of a bluesy vibe to it. Richie's voice is amazing. You know, I always knew him as a solo guitar player. I never really heard his voice all that much.
Yeah,
but
me neither.
He's incredible.
Live, I mean, he is unbelievable. Really.
Yeah. So that first Winery Dogs was great. Other records, obviously, Similitude is its own thing to me. That is a pinnacle album, and Mike will say so, you know, himself. It's one of the highlights of his career. Kaleidoscope, you know, came out during that time from Transatlantic, and you know, you guys were talking about Flying Colors. What I thought was so cool about that band is the diversity of songs, like Infinite Fire, and then you had Kayla and Shoulda Coulda Woulda, and you know, it's just every song was different and unique. And Casey was the wild card. You know, he was the guy, like you said, you knew the other 4 guys, but who's this guy Casey? He didn't have a typical prog voice. He brought a unique soul to that band. So yeah, I mean, as far as those other unique elements in the last 10 years, Flying Colors, Winery Dogs, and some of the Transatlantic and Neal Morse Band stuff.
Yeah,
incredible.
We haven't mentioned like Transatlantic, but Kaleidoscope was a big highlight of the decade for me too. I know, like, among most of the fans, maybe it's not in their top 3, I guess, because there's only 4 albums. But I love it.
It's hard to top the Whirlwind.
Yes,
I mean, the Whirlwind is definitely a high water mark. But
yeah, exactly. Unless you're Roie, because
it's hard to top Bridge. I mean, they're all good. I mean,
that's really that's the drawback of that record, is just that it's not the other records, but it's amazing.
But still a great record
by every measure. It's incredible.
Yeah,
that's the Transatlantic thing. It's always amazing. It's so.
Yeah, I looked really quickly just because I was curious to see how many albums he's been involved in and released each year. And in total, like, Kyle, I don't know if you have that in front of you. Do you have the number?
What's funny is I didn't add it up. I was thinking earlier that I probably should have. My like rough guesstimate would be, if you're counting like the covers discs and stuff, it's got to be like.
That's what I wasn't sure. So sort of counting everything, live albums, covers, discs, everything. It's
live too.
It's about 37 albums.
Yeah.
In 10 years.
Okay.
You want to know what's funny? Live. I added up the times that I've seen Mike in various incarnations just in the last 10 years, and it was 37. And that doesn't include like Morse Fest and cruises where he played multiple times with different bands. Just in the last 10 years, I've seen him 37 times. So that would make sense if he put out that many records.
Yeah.
You were at the Sons of Apollo like kickoff show, right?
Studio. So just studio albums. I'm counting cover to covers in that, you know, and some of that stuff, not live albums and obviously that, and just an appearance like the Haken thing where he hit the gong, but that's 22, that's an amazing
23
number. And it looks like the most albums he's released in 1 year is gonna be this year with 4 plus Flying Colors live album, making it 5.
The thing is, it's not just about quantity. Like, I love probably not I wouldn't say all, but most of these albums, and it's 22 in
True,
the last
right.
decade, you know, so they are all great.
Right.
And that's the thing. Not many musicians can claim that. They're like, yeah, the next 10 years
Right.
I'm gonna release 22 albums and they're all gonna be good. You know.
If you're Tool, you release one album in a decade, you know. So
I mean,
and it's not even that good.
and obviously it's different now.
Right.
In many cases, a lot of the bands that we like, I think because of the different finances and involved in music these days and things like that, release more music than we had from the bands we liked growing up, right? So growing up listening to bands like Def Leppard or Metallica or Queensryche or whatever, there's one album every 4 years. That was sort of what you got, right? So this is amazing to be a fan.
Well, this was funny to hear, like the quantity of albums. This is exactly what he set out to do. You know, when he left Dream Theater, there were reasons for it. And one was that he wanted to play with other people, and he wanted, you know, he has an interest in all different styles of music. If you can't look at the last 10 years and go mission accomplished, I don't know who else could. He's played so many styles of music, so many different bands. To leave your nest, you know, your home base that you helped create, that is your baby, to leave the safety of that, financially speaking, you know, career-wise, politically speaking, within bands or whatever, he set out to do something, and the last 10 years have proven he's been successful.
Yeah. I mean, so another big mark that I think he helped create was the big events in the last 10 years. Not to say he's the only one to have done it, but there was the Progressive Nation tours that Dream Theater was doing, and that had passed. And for me, and I think for you guys possibly as well, the most significant event was the Progressive Nation at Sea cruise, in 2014. Because, listen, for a lot of us, most people I know, that was the first exposure to more than a dozen bands that you either had never heard or certainly had never seen. And I think that one event, I mean, look, that one event, this website doesn't exist, I think, unless that one event happens, honestly.
Yeah.
And so
That's pretty cool.
That for me is amazing. And I think Kaleidoscope for me lives stronger in memory on that, as a part of that, when they played the whole album as the Sail Away. And so that's where, when you mentioned Transatlantic Kaleidoscope, for me, I right away think of them playing it on the cruise. That's where my mind goes. But I mean, the bands that I had never, Haken was established there, Anathema, Riverside, Devin Townsend I'd never seen.
Sparks with Neal,
Flower King, Spox with Neal, which was just
Doing the light.
forget it.
Yeah.
It
Well,
was
even,
crazy.
you know,
Goosebumps even thinking about it.
Mike was so busy. I mean, we had Animals as leaders on that. I mean, goodness gracious, the list. I mean,
Salvation,
Bumblefoot was there. Flower Kings were there. The list
What a
is
lineup,
like
man.
absurd.
Yeah.
Even Thank You Scientist was there
Thank
as
You
like an
Scientist was there.
additional band, like on the new Millennium stage or whatever. Like
Yeah.
playing in like a little tiny, you know, 50 people could fit in there.
Yeah.
Crowd surfing or whatever during a storm. Mike himself was busy. He was playing with Big Elf, which is an album that probably doesn't get as much credit. It's a great album.
Also during this 10-year period.
Yeah, crazy. PSMS, which doesn't get as much focus. They toured like literally the whole world, which is obviously kind of the jumping off point, I think, for Winery Dogs and of course for Sons of Apollo on some level. So significant. And then of course he's playing with Transatlantic. And then he does this like little Beatles like impromptu thing, which for me stands as like one of these incredible moments. And all four of us were there. So, you know.
Yeah.
And I got in a hot tub with Periphery. So, you know, some things happen.
Unforgettable moments. Yeah. We played basketball with Pain of Salvation, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wait, did you really?
Not me.
That's right.
No, I just watched it. Yeah. I'm that guy.
I just watched.
Yeah.
I'm
I wasn't as
guessing
fit as I am today.
Daniel had to be shirtless, whatever he was doing, I'm sure. So
the other one,
Daniel.
thankfully. Yeah. The other one, thankfully. Yeah.
Right.
Beardfish was there too. I remember that concert
Beardfish
being
was there. Deer Hunter.
amazing. Yeah.
That was my first time seeing Bumblefoot. You know, he did an acoustic thing with Tony Harnell from TNT, and I love Tony Harnell's voice, so I went to see him. And I'm like, Bumblefoot can he's a one-man show. He can sing everything. He knows lyrics, everything. He's a great singer.
He's a comedian.
And he's hilarious.
It's funny.
That tour, that show had everything for it. And it's weird that, we were there. We were all there. We didn't know each other yet, and now we've all become great friends over the years. I remember standing next to a very younger than you're looking at right now, Kyle Fagala, who looked like he was 12 then. He looks 15 now, but he had a Mike Portnoy wig on.
Cosplay.
Didn't you have didn't you have like a
Cosplay.
blue beard? Didn't you have a beard too?
I did. Yeah. One of the nights was like, dress up as your prog hero. So I dressed up as Mike or whatever. And I think Mike even came by and said hi. I think I snapped a photo with him. But the funniest part was I went into like an elevator, and somehow they like shuttled Neal onto this elevator, almost like they were trying to like get him behind the scenes. You know, there's that whole thing on the cruise where there's the people that just walk around and just don't care. And there's ones that like kind of don't want to be around people. And so they pushed Neal onto an elevator with me dressed as Mike Portnoy. And so we had kind of like a little funny moment where I sort of looked at him, he looked at me, and we're like, hey, fun stuff. My goodness. So many memories from that cruise.
I mean, but talking about some other events that continued on the cruises, you had the Yes tribute to Chris Squire that Mike was involved in. You had the his 50th birthday, which obviously was a big deal with Flying Colors was on the ship, and then you had the big one, which was the launching of Shattered Fortress, which allowed him to return to playing some Dream Theater stuff. Took on Haken again as his backing band. Eric Gillette, of course. And I think also that helped introduce them further to people across the world that maybe still hadn't caught up to who Haken or Eric Gillette was yet. So, did you guys see the Shattered Fortress anywhere else, or just on the cruise, or?
No, I watched it a couple of times after the cruise. One with Kyle. Yeah, just like unforgettable. The concerts were just above and beyond. Yeah, the long hair Kyle.
In Mexico, not this Kyle. I saw him in New York. Flew out. That's actually, you were talking about flying to see a show. I flew to see that. Kind of like had to see it,
Yeah.
Of course, he also got back with Tony Levin on that same ship. That 50th birthday thing was crazy. Like all the stuff, like Liquid Tension in some form, reuniting, and crazy what events happened just one time. What things happened there.
Look, I think that's another thing you have to give him props for. Was just creating special moments on that ship.
Well, to do the Shattered Fortress thing too, I think probably most people watching this will know about the 12-step suite and, all the songs that he wrote with Dream Theater about his addiction, alcohol, and recovery. So he always wanted to do that with Dream Theater, didn't have the chance. So the fact that he finally did it, that was special. B, it was, just hearing him play Dream Theater music again and not missing a beat. Like literally, it's just the muscle memory of that after not playing those songs for so long. To have Haken as his backing band, Daniel and I and a couple other buddies went down to Mexico City, and it was, like tears. We're just crying, a bunch of grown men over this such emotional thing. And for me personally, being a super white guy, to be with a Mexican audience. Like I've always thought of myself like Mexico or further south, in Brazil where Daniel's from, like those are my people. They just feel music like I feel it. My fellow white rocker friends don't really get it. So to be in that audience with those guys so passionate, hearing this music coming from this man, that was an amazing experience.
And we were like front row and had like a battalion of crazy, insane people behind us. And the concert was amazing. Like everyone was so like strong on stage. Ross as the frontman for that, he just did an amazing job. It was like so many feelings in there, like with all the scenes from Memory Music, and then the 12 step, like Kyle mentioned, it's just like probably my favorite show in the decade, or at least in the top 3 easily.
Yeah. No, that was amazing to see that on the ship. That was the one time I saw it, and I didn't get a chance to go see it again, but to see it there was just amazing. The one other moment on the cruises that I think for me was even more mind blowing was the last one where he reunited with Jordan Rudess to play the instrumentally.
That was insane too.
And we were all there
Yeah.
too, except for one shorter
One of the
hair
Kyles.
Kyle.
I missed it. Yeah. But I got to see the
But,
Prog Report video of it,
But
which is
that
great.
was, I mean, that was amazing, right?
Yeah,
that
that
was
was
just
nuts.
so unbelievable.
With Eric and Connor too, and they were
Yeah.
above and beyond as well. Like imagine having to recreate all that, right?
And you sort of had a
pretty
feeling
big
something
shoes to
was
fill.
going on, but no one really knew what they were going to play.
Right.
And to pull
then
that
play
off,
Again, it kind of harkens back to, like, you know, I was talking earlier when Mike wrote the fan letters back to people, you know, and that evolved into helping design the t-shirts and writing out unique set lists and coming up with these special one-offs, all the cover albums that they did in Dream Theater. And then, you know, he took it beyond that to be the ambassador for Prog and come up with all these special moments and concerts and you know, events that happened in the world of Prog that brought the four of us together and a whole lot of other friends too. It all kind of stems from him really being the flag bearer for it.
yeah. I think that's worth noting. You know, it's had a pretty significant mark for a lot of people. It's a lot of strong memories that us and a lot of others that like this music and have followed for the last 10 years. When you thought it was almost like, all right, Dream Theater's had its heyday and they're kind of over, and Neal left Spock's, and, you know, Jeff Tate's ruining Queensryche. And so there's not much left. And here you go with the last 10 years because of a lot of this stuff, I think, you know, which has been pretty remarkable. Any other events that we're missing? I think we've
Morse
That's
Fest.
a pretty big one.
Morse Fest.
Yeah.
Morse Fest. Obviously
I've
Neal
heard of
Morse
that.
based, but Mike's imprint is all over that. He's been to almost all of them. And I think influenced Neal and
It was his
some of
idea
the
after
obscure
all.
songs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that kind of stuff.
Morse Fest became a thing because of Mike, and even the name, you know, Neal didn't want to call
That's
it Morse
right.
Fest.
Well,
But
the
Mike
first
like,
one
"You
was
have to."
actually Morse Fest, like featuring Mike Portnoy,
yeah.
or
Mike
with
Portnoy,
with
yeah.
Mike, yeah.
Yeah.
So they
Very
dropped
weird.
that. But,
Yeah. So
Yeah,
here
but
we
I
are on
mean,
the 7th.
I mean, part of this is the fellowship of all this that comes, and I think has strengthened. I mean, I don't want to sound so serving to say that, but I think it's strengthened the community of modern Prague, and I think like the forums that exist, the friendships that exist, you can most pinpoint those to Morse Fest events. I think that's the jumping off. Of course, Progressive Nation at Sea came first. I think of that as sort of the genesis. That was the first time where you sat down at a bar next to Adrian Belew and talked for 30 minutes. And that was so weird, you know, or you bought a drink for Derek Shrinian or so. It's just a weird, like, what is this? This is like an alternate reality. Now for Kyle Graves, this is totally normal, but for the rest of us, this is weird. But then Morse Fest was like, I'm not only going to buy a drink, I might get to take home Mike Portnoy's goatee, you know, and these weird, just like next level, like we're hanging with these guys, and you see them at dinner and like, hey, Mike, like, you know, that sort of thing. And just the amount of music that they performed in one weekend that had never been performed before and will never be performed again. I mean, for a fan of this music, it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, this is unreal.
Yeah,
You know?
that is Mike all over it too. Because you go to a concert, you're not sure what they're gonna play. That was that back when we were gonna watch Dream Theater. You go to a concert and you keep praying they're playing the song that you want to listen to and that you want to see.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happened, sometimes it didn't. I'm glad that the time I watched Dream Theater with Mike, they played pretty much everything that I wanted. And that continued to happen with all the different bands. It has like the Mike stamp in there, his own thing. And that goes through set lists and in the songwriting as well. If you go and check, like we mentioned, like Similitude and The Great Adventure, like the sequel, both of them, you can see how like the structure of the songs has also the Mike thing to it, which it's very well organized and flows very well. Like I don't want to trash talk modern Dream Theater, don't get me wrong, but if you go to songs like Illumination Theory, which I don't really like, I think if that was polished up a little bit and be a little shorter, maybe a different order of stuff, then it would be like a 10 out of 10 song. But you can see why he is missed. That's my point.
We should also talk quickly just about maybe some of the other things he's done, you know, playing with Twisted Sister and maybe some other things. Kyle, you may have some more memory of some of those other things. Did you go
Twisted
to
Sister
a show to see them?
Man, I wish I had. No, I didn't get a chance to. I mean, let's be real. I was born in 1984, so I sort of, and I didn't grow up in
That's
Long
when Stay
Island.
Hungry
So,
came out.
Yeah.
so I sort of missed the Twisted Sister moment. But of course, my brother was older, 7 years older, so I grew up as in a sort of child of the 80s, tethered to my brother Phil. And I knew Twisted Sister, knew the videos, stuff like that. I think for Mike, obviously growing up in that area, that's like, it's one of his heroes. So to be able to be a part of that, but I think even more than that, just to be asked to be the one that takes over that position and then to do it. And then Dee Snider, even still today, a few months ago, an article came out about how, Dee was giving Mike all his credit for how he stepped up and did AJ's parts exactly and did it with respect. And that's a really like cool and unique opportunity to step in for a huge band and play at these enormous shows and then, hang it up, and be a part of what allows that band to do their thing and to put it to rest in a way that's respectful.
Yeah, I mean, you also have
course.
you have Metal Allegiance, BPMD, which came out this year.
Mike played with Stone Sour too, right? At some point.
Played a huge show with
Rio
Stone Sour.
Yeah, it was here.
It was
Yeah,
Rock and Rio 4. It was like a huge, like several 100,000 people. Played with Hale. He's done some like other like standalone things like that. Which is cool. I mean, he's just sort of the guy that people go to and ask him to do this stuff. I'd like to talk a little bit about Metal Allegiance. I know that's not everyone's favorite from this era. I reviewed the second album, so I spent a little more time with that. But that first album, a couple songs in particular, the one with Phil Anselmo is great. Dying Song.
I like the one with what's the name of the guy in Trivium? Sorry. Matt Heafy? Matt Heafy.
Yeah.
Sorry, that escaped me. But that one's my favorite, like Metal Allegiance song. It has some great stuff, and he enjoys playing with those guys.
Yeah, which started from the Metal Masters shows, and I mean he's playing with like all these like heroes. I think Mike's goal in some level is, as a fan of music, is to either play with everyone that he can or to cover everyone that he loves. Like, and he's getting pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
I was just looking up for Metal Masters. That was the genesis of what became a Metal Allegiance. But I saw them at a small club in Hollywood. I'm looking at my notes here. 2012, in April of 2012, and Phil Anselmo came out and they did the first half of Vulgar Display of Power, and the whole club exploded, man. I mean, it was just Portnoy
cool.
killing the drums.
I remember reading about that.
Dimebag forever.
There you go.
It's on the shirt.
Nice.
Hey, Roie, so you were at the Flying Colors in New York, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember that on that same day, Metal Masters played in New York as well? But
No.
Mike wasn't a part of that. So they had the two shows on the same day, if I remember correctly. But Mike wasn't a part of that. So you could only go to one. And I went to Flying Colors.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
regrets.
I wouldn't have chosen Metal Masters.
Made the right choice.
Yeah.
But I think like the point of it all is even if it's not something that's like your thing or whatever, the fact that he's allowed himself, like you think of like a chef or something, like if you're trained in a certain cuisine, you don't usually step out of that. So for a musician to be able to step out of that and do it at the highest possible level is obviously really impressive. And I know for him it's fulfilling because it allows him to kind of scratch whatever itch he's got, which has been this decade. He's scratched every possible itch except for dubstep. He's not done that yet.
Still a few months left in the year.
That's why he left. Like I said before, that's exactly why he left. So I mean, if you set out to play as many things as you can and you do it, that's awesome.
I think what's really cool about the 10-year anniversary coming up is that right almost to the week is the release of the John Petrucci record, Terminal Velocity, which has Mike on drums, if you've been under a rock and haven't known about it. And I think that's in a weird way, obviously not planned, coincidental, but for it to be sort of around the 10-year mark like that is pretty cool.
Goes full circle.
And it's a fantastic record. They sound great together on it. From the first minute of hearing it, for me, it was like hearing the two of them sound like they should sound, right? I think that's what we've all sort of said about it, and most people have commented. And so I think that's a cool full circle kind of story on this whole thing.
It's interesting, like Dream Theater, if you go into every 10 years, the end of the decade, something in Mike's career like pretty big has happened. In 1989, when Dream and Day Unite came out, 1999, A Saints from Memory, which is their big album. So 2009 was the last full year of Mike on Dream Theater. He left the next year. So you had this crazy decade, and now it's 2019. It was 2019, sorry. And it was before the end of the world. So that's it. And now the full circle thing with John Petrucci,
Right.
which is awesome. Yeah, we've all, I think, in the planet listen to the record, and you can hear the chemistry and so many great moments in that album. Of course, it's a John Petrucci album, so it's a guitar record. But what Mike brings to the table with Dave as well is just insane.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than family, you know, and whether that's people you're born to or your friends that you choose to be your family. When the split happened, to see those two be at odds was, you know, it was painful. I can't imagine how painful it was for them if the rest of us as just fans, you know, was like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. These brothers are breaking up. You know, they married women from the same band, you know, both their wives. They had kids around the same time. Their kids came on tour with them, grew up together. You know, to see them at odds was really hard. So 10 years later, people are still saying, when is he going to go back to Dream Theater? If he never plays another note of music with Dream Theater, the fact that those two are friends again and then they can play music together again, that's worth all the gold in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and John has said that for him, it gives him the best of both worlds. You know, he still has Dream Theater and Mangini in that band, who's an amazing drummer in his own right. And then he still now gets to play with Mike and do this. And maybe that's where it ends up, which is fine.
Right. Or of course, there's the hope of Liquid Tension, you know, but yeah, just seeing those guys together and hear them together on John's record, amazing. The chemistry is there, you know?
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. It is. And I'm glad. I think we're all glad that worked out and that we have that album. I mean, 2020 has been just a ridiculous year for music. If we say that every year, right? Like, what else could come out? Because last year was, you know, Flying Colors and Neal Morse Band and whatever else came out. And then this year there's a whole nother run of things, and who knows what's coming out next year. I mean, it's of course, well, there is supposedly a Transatlantic 5, not supposedly, they have worked on it, and it is coming out, but that will happen and we will have that. So
if that makes it out in 2020, then that's like arguably Mike's strongest year of all time. I mean, this year's unreal.
It will be a very heavy year. Yeah. I mean, a lot of albums.
Yeah. We've said this about last year too, remember?
We did. Yeah, I know. It's pretty...
We mean it this year. We really mean it. I think it's worth just sharing, like, you know, Sons of Apollo, we haven't spent a lot of time on them. Obviously, great band. You know, it's probably of picking these, it isn't my favorite, let's say, but a great show, like great albums, very solid albums. It has a big audience. I think it's been, you know, probably of his new groups, the one that's had perhaps the biggest audience, and they've toured it like crazy. Maybe the Winery Dogs had the bigger audience, but similar. And then for them to not be able to play was a bummer. I mean, you know, so I didn't get to see them on the second tour, and it was planning to, of course, and a lot of people that would be true of. They were actually ahead of the curve on canceling because of COVID. I remember when they did it, people were like, what are you canceling because of COVID?
They really were. And they had a big tour lined up in Europe. As with most prog bands, the audience is bigger over there. Mm-hmm. And I did get a chance to see them in New York on this last tour about a month before the world shut down. And it was incredible. I mean, that band, when they get the 5 of those guys together, I mean, that's an all-star team.
Yeah, it's a juggernaut. Yeah, I think it was the last concert I saw before everything went away, was Sons of Apollo. And what I love about that band is, you know, they're not reinventing the prog wheel, but at the same time, they're not Dream Theater. You know, they're not everybody saying, oh, it's Portnoy and Shrine together. They are their own thing. They've got their own sound. And with the addition of, much like Casey was sort of the wild card in Flying Colors, Jeff Scott Soto, who I had a cat named Soto. I mean, I followed Jeff's career for decades. But to have him as the front man, adding more of an AOR type of vibe to a super heavy progressive band, such a cool, you know, blend of things. And that was the big bummer about that second record. It's a strong record, and they got maybe a month of touring in before it went away.
Yeah,
but they'll be back. They'll be back.
Yeah, I mean, look, they keep posting about rescheduled dates for Europe. You know, for next year.
It's insane how many crazy guitar players Mike got to team with, right? If you go like, I've been a fan of Bumblefoot for a while too. He's one of the coolest guys in music too, and so talented. Actually, all the guys, right? It's Mike's official reunion with Derek Sherinian. We haven't mentioned it, but that was also pretty cool to see. I'm a big fan of Falling into Infinity. I love Derek Stone and his style, and when he brings that into the forefront of Sons of Apollo, I think there are some pretty special songs in the middle there.
Mhm.
Yeah, agreed. It's glad to see them together and to have Derek back in the prog world doing what he does there. I think if it works, and that's also a band that I mean they're planning on continuing, and I hope they do.
Yep.
So I think that just about covers it. I mean, it's been a pretty remarkable 10 years. Following what we thought was really terrible news, and so nice to recap it. Actually, I think this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It's been therapeutic, right? I think this he picked Shattered Fortress as the name for this tour, I think on purpose. Obviously it alluded to his, alcohol addiction and things, but it really sort of fits this idea that his, severing from Dream Theater and the breakup, it is sort of like things were sort of, shattered and then kind of strewn about. And he's spent the last 10 years kind of putting it back together, I think on a personal level, on a musical level, and just on a career level, and maybe even on a creative level. And I think you look at that mirror now that's kind of been, put back together, and it's like, this was for a good reason, Yeah. And so I think that to me is the arc of this season of his life is just, man, he knew what he was trying to do here and he accomplished it. And we're all the happier to have been a part of it and to be on that ride.
I want to give one last shout to what he did for the Prog from Home concert that we put on the Prog Report site and YouTube page, and I think that furthered the whole thing about him trying to do just things to make himself happy and try out his own kind of music that he grew up liking or whatever, and performing a song by Jellyfish, if you follow him, that's one of his all-time favorite bands and albums. Found the two guys from Jellyfish and got them to play on a song and put together this killer video for I Want to Stay Home, created by this guy. And
on my screen, he's this guy.
and here,
right
over there.
But
Daniel, our good buddy Daniel over here, made the video, and so yeah, and that was an amazing way to close out that. So
over a dozen quarantine videos that he's done. Because he didn't have anything to do. He just, shut it up in his house. So that's what comes out is all these videos. And on that specific video, which is the one that stands out in my mind, and there's been some really cool ones, but he does everything: bass, guitar, he sings, percussion, drums. I mean,
I didn't know he could play guitar. Actually, I maybe
either.
I should have. I just don't recall him ever being put in that position where I would have seen it. But
I think that's what an artist does. An artist, even if they're at home with their family, they're making music. And, for him to leave the nest of Dream Theater 10 years ago and venture out knowing that he probably was going to make less money, have less fame, less notoriety, and do all these different projects. And now sort of like a branching tree, it's turned into all these other things. And, Daniel was talking about Haken and all these bands that he's championed, things like that. The guy is an artist. He's not somebody who's just, I've made my career doing this thing, I'm going to stick with it because I know it's comfortable and I can make money at it. To step away from that and then to go full circle 10 years later and just be making videos in your basement with your daughter, that's pretty cool.
It is.
And
that shows his love of music.
They've
right?
all been.
He's a fan above all.
No, it's fun to see. It's great, and we're everybody, including us. I mean, we're all looking for an outlet to keep ourselves from going crazy during all of this, and so to have more stuff by all these artists, Mike and Neal or whoever it is, has been great. It helps everybody get through it, I think. So I think that about covers it, unless anybody has any last words.
Just he'll be at Morse Fest 2020, the lockdown, which is a whole nother like crazy thing, So Mike has to find a way to perform live, right?
That'll be his one
if
for
you go,
the one time.
You'll sit next to that Kyle right there.
Yep.
And if you don't go, you can watch it online. So
like the rest of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. Always good to
Awesome.
see you guys on here and talk. And this was fun to talk about. Have a good one. We'll see you all again at the next podcast, audio, video, whatever it may be. And see ya.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Always a pleasure.
Rock on.